U.S. President Barack Obama and Prime Minister Stephen Harper share a generational bond. They're too young to be baby boomers and too old to be part of Generation X. They're part of a large percentage of the population now being labeled Generation Jones. Jonathan Pontell coined the term, and he joins us this morning from Los Angeles. So why the need for this new category, Jonathan?
Well, you know, labels are used often in silly and inaccurate ways, but in an increasingly info-blitzed world, labels help us make sense of ourselves. And, you know, we're going to be labeled generationally anyway, so it might as well be an accurate label. And those of us that were born in the second half of that demographic boom in births really don't share much with the baby boom generation. We really had very significantly different formative experiences.
And there's specific cultural references, ideologies that would separate boomers from the Jonesers. What are they?
Well, you know, part of it is the 60s. I wrote an op-ed that was in the Globe and Mail yesterday looking at that part of it. You know, it was a very different experience for boomers versus Jonesers in the 1960s. They were well into their teens and 20s and out changing the world. We were the ones being formed by those changes. We were just little kids, and it made a fundamental difference. They were able to sort of play that out at the time. We really weren't, sort of looked forward to our turn, which of course never came, and it left this generation with a certain Jonesin quality, which is slang for a certain craving or yearning.
That's where the Jones comes from, because we were wondering about that. It's Jonesing. We thought, is it keeping up with the Joneses that you took the reference from?
Well, a little bit of keeping up with... A little bit also. The name has several connotations. Part of it comes from the idea of a large anonymous generation. Could have been Generation Smith, but Generation Jones has a number of other connotations. A little bit of the keeping up with the Joneses thing, that in the sense that our generation, which has the most populous birth years in both Canada and the U.S., really we've had this kind of keeping up with the Joneses competitiveness because we've had to compete against the large number of boomers ahead of us as well as our own numbers. But the Jonesin quality is something that's part of the core of this generation. We had huge expectations that in some ways were left unfulfilled, and it left this generation with a certain pending, unrequited Jonesin quality.
What do you think that means then as far as the relationship between our Prime Minister and U.S. President Barack Obama? They're meeting today in Ottawa. What do you think that means, that they both belong to this generation, and all that you've just said? What does that mean to their relationship, how it'll be built, and how they'll get along?
You know, it's interesting when you look back historically at relationships between leaders. Of course, the policy issues and their political philosophies are important, but the personal relationship sometimes gets underplayed in terms of its importance. There are a lot of generational common denominators between Harper and Obama, and, you know, part of it is just as simple as the fact that you know, they grew up listening more or less to the same music and watching more or less the same shows and were affected by the same sorts of historical, political, cultural, economic events that helped shape their worldview. Leaders that are of the same generation, in general, do tend to get along better. So, I mean, I do think it will facilitate a better relationship between the two of them.
Most interesting. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And for a link to more on Generation Jones, you can log on to our website, canadaam.ctv.ca.